Well, just last week when you were at the Bloomberg breakfast that I was attending, hosted by Bloomberg, you talked about your own version of the DREAM Act, and you told us that your DREAM Act alternative could get, quote, significant Republican support in the Senate. Then on Monday, you told the Wall Street Journal that you weren't planning to propose this before the election. At the time, you had said that you had talked to a lot of Republicans, you were working on the details, you still were planning last Wednesday to propose the legislation. So is it because of what the president did in the intervening days that you decided not to submit your legislation?
Well, again, we're going to continue to formulate the idea, and the question of the timing will be left up to what we see and what the circumstances are in terms of what I don't want to trigger is a partisan bickering over an issue, because it's just going to set us back. The first thing I learned when I came here is no one wanted to talk about immigration because they had the scars from years of combat over it. But here's the other point I would make. One of the arguments that I would use, I would go to my colleagues, would say, and both sides, quite frankly, and I would say, you know, let's do this issue, and they would say, well, why now? I mean, there's so many other important issues. Can't this one wait until after the elections? And I used to say, well, these kids want to go to college in September. Now that argument is gone. That sense of urgency has been taken away. And the fact that it's all gotten mixed up in this election year and it's now being used to attack Republicans has only made it harder. So I'm still optimistic about the long term of this idea, but I think there's a lot of work to do now because of the way the president did it.
Well, at the same time, is it because the Romney campaign has asked you to back off?
No, absolutely not. On the contrary, I think we've kept them up to date on what we've been working on. But here's the other thing that's important, Andrea. When you do important and significant legislation like this that impacts the real lives of real people, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. How many people will it impact? Does it have any costs? Is there anything we're missing here? We want to be able to have answers to every question. We want to be able to have answers to every conceivable circumstance that it would apply. And we're still in the process of getting that. We've also, just a week ago, have been meeting with stakeholders, whether it's kids that would be impacted by it or people concerned about illegal immigration. We're trying to take as much input as possible, and I think we're very close to having a very specific piece of legislation. Look, again, I hope I'm wrong, but I'm concerned that the way the president did this last Friday by politicizing this is just going to make it harder to find a long-term solution to a long-term problem.
And when we talk about immigration, you have your own perspective. As you write in American Sun, you write that many people who come here illegally are doing exactly what we would do if we lived in a country where we couldn't feed our families. If my kids went to sleep hungry every night and my country didn't give me an opportunity to feed them, there isn't a law, no matter how restrictive, that would prevent me from coming here. That's on page 248. You know, you have that perspective, and arguably that's one reason why many people believe that you would be a big addition to the ticket, because you can express what many people are feeling. You understand it because you've lived it.
Well, again, I think the point I make, and people find it hard to argue against, if your kids were hungry every night, what is it there's virtually nothing you wouldn't do to help them out. And we have to understand that that's why most of these people come here, to provide their families a better life. But we also have to understand, however, that we can't be the only country in the world that doesn't enforce its immigration laws. We have very generous immigration laws. 1 million people a year immigrate to the United States legally. No other country even comes close. So we have to and people are concerned about the impact that illegal immigration is having, and rightfully so. Those are two very legitimate considerations. They have to be balanced, but we'll only be able to balance them responsibly if we have the kind of if we can depoliticize this issue. And that's the point I'm trying to drive through my family experience in my book.
And the debates, the Republican debates, there's a reason why a lot of Hispanic people felt that the debates and the Republican Party was excluding them. You had Mitt Romney talking about self-deportation. You had Herman Cain talking about electric fences. In your book, you say there is no doubt that the rhetoric and tone used by some Republican opponents of immigration reform have hurt the party with Hispanics. I can't stand to hear immigrants described in terms more appropriate to a plague of locusts than human beings. And although I believe they are a small minority, I begin to wonder if some of the people who speak so disparagingly about immigrants would be just as worked up if most of them were coming from Canada. There is an issue of race and ethnicity here. Yes,
well, let me be clear, first of all. I wasn't referring to the presidential debate when those words were written. Some of those debates hadn't even happened yet. I think the Herman Cain incident you talk about was a joke that he has admitted was in poor taste. And Mitt Romney's term is not a policy. He's describing what would happen in a country where there was an effective E-Verify system and things of that nature. But look, there are voices in American politics on the right that have said things that I think are unfortunate about immigration, that have not recognized what I've discussed as the human element of immigration. There are voices on the left that say outrageous things too. I mean, when I first presented my idea about giving non-immigrant visas to these kids, Harry Reid wrote an op-ed in the Miami Herald attacking me. The New York Times said it should be dismissed offhand. I had some liberal bloggers say that I was proposing a 3/5 compromise or a form of American apartheid. I've been called anti-immigrant by some. I mean, there's also outrageous speech on the left on this issue. I would say that it gets back to the point I made, that unless we depoliticize this issue, we're never going to begin to work on a real, responsible, balanced solution.
We've been sharing with our viewers some of the pictures that you've provided through your book of you and your family and the whole story of the Cuban migration to Florida. And in your case, your family, you've learned through the research and through other people's reporting as well, they came earlier than you thought. They came before the Castro takeover. But what is that experience, and what does that say to all Americans about those who are, you describe it as being exiled from Cuba?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the Cuban exile story is a complicated one. It's not a neat chronological one. There have always been Cuban exiles. Jose Marti, the great Cuban patriot, was an exile most of his political involvement, living in New York and in Tampa, not even in Cuba itself. And my parents came in 1956, and the reality is that they came because there was a lot of instability in Cuba and were looking for a better life. They always longed to be able to move back to the United States, to Cuba, and of course that became impossible for them. They settled in this country, and this country gave them extraordinary opportunities. And the arguments that I make in my book, An American Son, is that the American dream can be defined in many different ways. For my family, the American dream was the ability for my parents to give me the chances that they didn't have. And I recognize that I was privileged, not with money, not with wealth, not even with connections. I was privileged with a strong and stable home, and I was privileged to grow up in a family that encouraged me to dream and the opportunity to grow up in this country and the world.
I wanted to ask you also about your comments about Eric Holder. You have said that you think that he should resign. Should he be fired? I mean, what should happen to Eric Holder, the Attorney General?
Well, look, first of all, I've held back on commenting on that. I always like to give the benefit of the doubt. I don't like these kinds of, constitutional arguments back and forth in terms of who should be in office and calling for resignations. I really refrain from that. But I think after yesterday, I think after asserting executive privilege a year after these events even occurred, I think that the House has bent over backwards to provide the opportunity to address the concerns the Congress has without endangering the ability of Eric Holder to do his job. I think we've reached the point of no return now. There's very little confidence here in the Senate on behalf of Republicans, and I think in general in Congress, on Eric Holder's ability now to do the job. And there's now real and increasing concern that he lied to Congress, that the administration was involved in an effort to lie to Congress. And this notion about keeping information away from us has only heightened those concerns.
We've had confrontations like this in previous administrations with others, attorneys general, most recently with the Bush White House with Attorney General Gonzalez. But do you really think that this has reached the stage where Eric Holder should not be holding his job?
I do, and I think if you look at those cases, the administrations almost always gave in at the end and produced documents, whether it was in some of the investigations that happened under President Bush or whether under President Reagan. I think this assertion of executive privilege on this instance is particularly troubling because it indicates potentially that there was in fact communications directly with the White House itself. Again, we don't know, and that's the problem. We don't know, and if indeed there is nothing like that in there, then why not make it available to a select group of congressmen who have specific oversight over this issue? So, look, I don't take this stuff lightly. I don't like calling for resignations. I don't like doing these kinds of things, but I just think I was asked a question today, and my opinion is we've reached the point of no return with regards to Eric Holder.
And Mitt Romney has sort of broken his own self-imposed rule and confirmed that, in fact, the campaign is vetting you to be the running mate. So have you been sharing your finances and all of your background information with the campaign?
Well, I made a decision a couple months ago not to discuss the vice presidential process at all. It's not my process, and I want to respect the governor's ability to go through his process. So I just don't comment on it one way or the other. The one thing I can say definitively is that knowing what I know about Mitt Romney's career, I have no doubt in my mind he's going to make a very good selection.
Now, the convention is going to be in your state, in Tampa. How about you as the keynoter, if not the vice president?
Well, I haven't thought about any of it. I'll do whatever they ask me to do to be helpful. I don't have any specific goal in mind in terms of the convention. My only advice is, it's going to be plenty hot. Bring sunscreen and some patience.
We will, and lots of water. Thank you very much, Senator Rubio. Thanks on a busy day. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
The book is An American Son, and thanks for your time.
Thank you.